They chased me away and took my child from me. I am innocent.
The office was alive with chatter and perfume. High heels clicked against the marble floor and laughter floated through the air like music. To everyone else, it was just another busy Monday at Johnson & Co. Holdings, one of Lagos's most prestigious firms. But to Grace Jones, it was another day to sweep through rooms that smelled of success but lacked compassion. Her faded blue uniform clung to her small frame, and the mop in her hands had seen more years than most of the interns there. She moved quietly, head bowed, her gray hair neatly tucked under her cap. No one noticed her, except when someone needed the trash emptied or the floor wiped. "Grace, please clean this area before you leave." Vanessa's voice cut through the air sharply. She was the company's human resources manager, beautiful, confident, and proudly loud. She dropped a plastic cup on the floor without looking back. Grace nodded gently. "Yes, ma'am," she replied softly, bending to pick it up. As she did, a few young staff members exchanged amused glances. One whispered, "She acts like a servant. Some people have no self-respect." Grace pretended not to hear. Her hands trembled slightly, but she smiled. Years had taught her that silence was safer than pride. Later that morning, a commotion broke out near the conference room. A laptop had fallen to the floor and shattered. Vanessa stormed in, her eyes blazing. "Who did this?" she demanded. Everyone froze. Then her gaze landed on Tunde, the shy new intern, with a calm face and gentle voice. "You," she hissed. "Do you have any idea how much this laptop costs?" Tunde stammered, trying to explain, but the words wouldn't come. He looked so nervous, so out of place, that even Grace felt a sting in her chest. Before anyone could say another word, Grace stepped forward. "Ma'am, it was me," she said quietly. The room went silent. "I was cleaning, and my mop handle must have hit the table. I'm very sorry." Vanessa's face lit up with cruel amusement. "You?" she sneered. "Of course. It's always the cleaner. You people never stop causing trouble." A few people laughed. Grace bowed her head again and whispered an apology. Tunde looked at her, confused and almost hurt. He knew she wasn't the one who broke it. Something in her eyes told him she was protecting him, a stranger she barely knew. After the meeting ended, Tunde followed her quietly to the cleaning storage room. "Ma'am," he said gently, "why did you say it was you?" Grace smiled without turning. "Because sometimes peace is more valuable than being right," she said softly. Her voice carried years of weight, yet it was calm, like someone who had already made peace with suffering. She wrung out her mop and kept working. Tunde hesitated, then offered to help her lift a bucket of water. "No, my son, don't worry," she said kindly. "You'll stain your shirt." He smiled faintly. "It's fine, ma'am. It's only water." For the first time, Grace looked at him properly. His eyes, warm, kind, and filled with a quiet sadness, made her heart skip. Something about him felt strangely familiar. That night, after work, she sat in her small one-room apartment in Mushin. The ceiling leaked, the fan creaked, and the electricity had gone out again. But she didn't mind. She took out an old, wrinkled photograph from her Bible. A baby boy wrapped in a white blanket, his name written neatly on the back. Tunde Johnson. She stared at it, tears glistening in her eyes. "God, please keep him safe wherever he is," she whispered. The next morning, the company buzzed again with gossip. Vanessa told everyone about the foolish cleaner who almost ruined the CEO's presentation. But Grace just smiled and kept working. When she bent to clean near the glass elevators, Tunde walked by carrying some files. He paused and lowered his voice. "Ma'am, thank you for yesterday." She nodded. "It's nothing." "No," he insisted. "It means a lot to me." His sincerity startled her. He didn't speak like the others. He spoke like someone who valued people, not titles. Later that afternoon, while organizing cleaning supplies, Tunde's eyes caught something sticking out of Grace's handbag, the old photograph. He froze. It was faint, aged, but the name written behind it was his own. His full name, Tunde Johnson. His chest tightened. He glanced toward her, still sweeping near the hallway, humming a quiet hymn under her breath. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. How did she have his picture? Who exactly was this woman everyone ignored? That night, he couldn't sleep. In his small rented apartment in Ikoyi, Tunde stared at the ceiling, replaying every encounter, her kindness, her calmness, her eyes that looked oddly familiar. His chest ached with confusion. There was something deeper here, something he needed to understand. Grace Jones, he whispered to himself. Who are you really? The next day, as dawn broke, Grace arrived early as usual. She loved the quiet before everyone came in, that moment when Lagos was still waking, when her prayers could rise to heaven without interruption. She stood by the window, watching the sun crawl over the skyline, whispering softly, "Thank you, Lord, for one more day." Behind her, Tunde entered quietly, pretending to be early for work. He watched her from the doorway, wondering how such peace could live in someone who had every reason to be bitter. Grace turned slightly, sensing his presence. "You're early," she said with a gentle smile. "And you're always here before everyone else," he replied. They both laughed lightly, and for a moment time slowed. The laughter of a cleaner and an intern, two people from worlds apart, bound by something neither yet understood. Before leaving for the day, Grace received her weekly pay, small, barely enough to cover rent and medicine. But she tucked part of it aside, as she always did, to send to the orphanage where she volunteered every Sunday. That night, while she prayed, the photograph slipped from her Bible again. This time, she didn't put it away. She stared long and hard at the face of her son, whom she hadn't seen since he was 2. "You'll find your way back, my child," she murmured. "Even if you no longer remember me." At that same hour, miles away, Tunde sat by his desk, staring at the photograph he had secretly taken a picture of with his phone. The resemblance was haunting. The name, the age, even the birth date matched his own. He opened his laptop, searching records, piecing together fragments from his life. The pieces didn't fit until suddenly they did. His eyes widened. His breath caught. "It can't be," he whispered. The rain fell steadily against the window of Grace's tiny apartment. Outside, the city moved in hurried rhythm buses honking, people running for shelter, but inside, everything was still. Grace sat at her small table, the dim light of a kerosene lamp flickering over her face. Her fingers traced the edge of the old photograph. Every wrinkle on her hands carried a memory she could never erase. The storm outside sounded like the one that had torn her life apart decades ago. She remembered that night vividly, the night she lost everything. The mansion smelled of luxury and betrayal. The laughter of rich guests echoed down the hall as Grace stood in her small room, holding her crying baby close. She had married into wealth, but her husband's family never accepted her. To them, she was a mistake, a poor woman from nowhere who dared to dream beyond her station. "Grace, you have to leave," her husband's mother had said, her voice sharp as glass. "You're ruining his reputation. We'll take care of the boy. You can't offer him anything." Grace had fallen to her knees, begging. "Please, he's my child. I'll do anything. Just let me keep him." But her tears met cold eyes. Her husband, unable to stand up to his mother, turned away. That night, security guards escorted her out through the servants' gate, her hands empty, her heart shattered. The sound of her baby crying still echoed in her ears as the gates closed behind her. Since that day, Grace Jones had lived quietly, holding on to the hope that God would one day let her see her son again. She worked, prayed, and survived. She followed every article about the Johnson family, cutting out newspaper photos of their son, Tunde, as he grew into a successful businessman. She celebrated his graduations, his awards, his promotions, all from a distance. The world saw a billionaire's heir. She saw the little boy who used to fall asleep in her arms. Now, sitting in the glow of the lamp, Grace whispered, "You've become everything I dreamed for you, my son." Her voice trembled. She pressed the photograph to her chest and closed her eyes. Meanwhile, in the city's high-end district, Tunde Johnson sat in his apartment, surrounded by files, records, and questions. Sleep had become impossible since the night he discovered the photograph in Grace's bag. There was no logical reason for her to have it. The dates, the name, even the handwriting on the back, it all matched. Yet it was absurd to think that the humble cleaner could have any connection to his family. He typed Grace Jones into his laptop. Dozens of results appeared, but none seemed to fit until one caught his attention, an old hospital newsletter from over 30 years ago. It mentioned a maternity case involving a young woman named Grace Jones, listed as the mother of a newborn male, Tunde Johnson. His heart raced. Could it be the same Grace Jones? The next morning, he arrived at the office earlier than usual. Grace was already there, as always. She was polishing the glass doors, her movements slow and deliberate. When she saw him, she smiled warmly. "Good morning, Mr. Tunde." He nodded, trying to mask his thoughts. "Morning, ma'am. You're always early." She chuckled softly. "Old habits. The morning feels kinder before the world wakes up." As she turned back to her work, Tunde noticed the quiet dignity in her posture. The way she never complained, never seemed bitter despite everything life had taken from her. Something inside him stirred, admiration, but also guilt. He couldn't explain why. Later that day, Vanessa stormed into Tunde's office. Her tone was sweet but edged with envy. "Tunde, people are starting to talk," she began. "About what?" he asked, not looking up from his screen. "About you and the cleaner," she said, smiling coldly. "You're always defending her. It's so unusual." Tunde's eyes lifted slowly. "She's kind," he said simply. "Something this company doesn't have enough of." Vanessa scoffed, flipping her hair. "Kindness doesn't get promotions, Tunde. You'll learn that soon." She left before he could respond, but her words lingered like poison. That evening, when Grace went to collect her cleaning supplies, she noticed the storage room door slightly open. Inside, Tunde stood beside a stack of boxes, holding a file. "I didn't mean to invade your space," he said quickly. "I just needed to understand something." Grace tilted her head, puzzled. "Understand what, my dear?" He hesitated, his heart pounding. "That photo in your bag," he said softly. "Where did you get it?" Grace froze. The question hit her like thunder. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. "That picture. It's very old," she finally said. "Why are you asking?" "Because the name written on it is mine," he said, his voice trembling. "And the handwriting looks just like my late grandmother's." Grace's face turned pale. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. "Your grandmother?" she whispered. "Is your father still alive?" Tunde nodded slowly. "Yes. He owns the company." Her hand covered her mouth. The room seemed to spin. For years she had prayed to see her son again, but she had never imagined it would happen like this, in a cleaning room, between buckets and mops. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced herself to stay composed. "I must go," she said quickly, brushing past him. That night, Grace didn't sleep. The rain returned, and she sat by the window, her Bible open, her hands trembling. "God, what are you doing?" she whispered. The memories came flooding back, the night she lost her child, the years of silence, the pain that never left. Could this young man really be her son? Or was it just another cruel twist of fate? The next morning, Tunde couldn't focus on work. He spent hours calling hospitals and archives, searching for any record that could confirm the truth. By afternoon, he finally got a lead, an old employee at St. Mary's Hospital who remembered the case. The man's voice crackled over the phone. "Yes, I recall that name. Grace Jones. The child was registered as Tunde Johnson. But the file was sealed by the Johnson family shortly after birth." Tunde's heart pounded. "Is there a way I can see it?" he asked. The man hesitated. "It's been over 30 years, but maybe. If you come in person." The next day, Tunde visited the hospital. The corridors smelled faintly of antiseptic and nostalgia. The old clerk handed him a dusty folder. Inside were faded papers, brittle with age. His eyes scanned the pages. Birth record: baby boy Johnson. Mother: Grace Jones. Father: Michael Johnson. His breath caught. There it was. Her signature, clear and steady. Grace Jones, written beside his own name. He touched the page as if it were sacred. For a long time, he couldn't move. Everything he knew about his life, his family, his mother, it all crumbled in a single moment. He looked up, his hands shaking. The world outside continued as normal, cars passing, people laughing, but inside him, everything had changed. Back at the office, Grace was finishing her shift when she received a call from an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A familiar voice whispered, trembling with emotion, "Ma'am, it's me, Tunde." She froze. "I know," he said softly. "I know who you are." The mop slipped from her hand and fell to the floor with a loud thud. Her knees weakened, her breath caught, and the tears she had held back for decades finally began to fall. The morning began like any other. Grace arrived before sunrise, mopping the marble floors of the grand lobby. The building was quiet, except for the soft swish of her mop and the hum of the air conditioner. Every morning, she worked with quiet pride, never knowing who noticed, but today felt different. Whispers followed her like shadows. She could feel eyes on her, curious, judging, cruel. By 8 o'clock, the office buzzed with unusual energy. Employees hurried around, giggling, exchanging glances. Grace tried to ignore it. She smiled politely at everyone, but each smile she received in return felt sharp, mocking. When she passed Vanessa near the reception, the young woman's smirk said more than words ever could. "Good morning, Ma," Vanessa said sweetly. "You might want to freshen up before the staff meeting. It's a big day." Grace nodded slowly. "Of course, dear." She didn't know why her chest felt heavy, why her instincts whispered something's wrong. Upstairs in his office, Tunde stared at his computer screen but couldn't read a single word. His mind kept replaying the hospital record. Grace Jones, his mother. Every time he thought of it, his heart tightened. He wanted to tell her, to hold her, to say the words she'd waited decades to hear. But how? How do you tell the woman everyone sees as a cleaner that she's the mother of the company's heir? Before he could act, Vanessa appeared at his door. "Hey," she said, her voice casual but eyes glittering. "Don't forget the meeting. The board's downstairs." He nodded, distracted. "Right. I'll be there soon." Vanessa turned to leave but paused. "By the way," she added with a sly smile, "I found something interesting about your favorite cleaner. You might want to stay till the end." Tunde frowned, uneasy. "What are you talking about?" But she was already gone. Minutes later, the entire staff gathered in the glass-walled conference hall. Grace stood quietly at the back, her mop bucket tucked neatly away. She had never been invited to these meetings before, but Vanessa had personally asked her to attend. "Every member of this company matters," Vanessa had said earlier. "Even our cleaners deserve to be seen." Grace believed her. She thought maybe for once, kindness was being returned. The meeting began with the usual updates, numbers, reports, achievements. Tunde sat beside his father, Mr. Johnson, who spoke proudly about the company's success. But throughout it all, Tunde's eyes kept drifting to Grace, standing humbly near the door, her hands clasped. He couldn't focus. Every time she looked down, his chest ached with guilt. Then Vanessa stood up. Her tone shifted. "Before we close, I'd like to recognize someone who's been part of this company for years. Someone who has, in her own way, kept our floors shining and our halls clean." She smiled at Grace. "Mrs. Grace Jones, could you come forward?" The room turned to look at her. Grace blinked, startled. "Meh?" she asked softly. "Yes, you," Vanessa said, her voice syrupy. "Come on, don't be shy." Grace hesitated, then stepped forward slowly. A few people clapped half-heartedly. The others whispered. Vanessa continued, her words dripping with false sweetness. "You see, everyone, Mrs. Grace here isn't just an ordinary cleaner. No, she has quite a story about how far some people will go to hide who they really are." Grace froze. "I don't understand," she whispered. Vanessa's grin widened. "Oh, don't play innocent. You've been keeping secrets, haven't you? Does anyone here know that Mrs. Grace once worked for the Johnson family decades ago? That she left under suspicious circumstances?" Gasps rippled through the room. Grace's hands trembled. "Please," she said quietly, "don't do this." "Oh, I think we should," Vanessa said, turning toward the big screen behind her. "Because what's a company without transparency, right?" With a click, photos flashed on the projector, grainy old newspaper clippings, headlines half faded with time. "Housemaid dismissed after family scandal." "Mysterious departure of Grace Jones." Someone in the crowd laughed. Others murmured. Grace's heart pounded in her chest. Her eyes burned. "That's not true," she said, her voice trembling. "Those were lies from years ago." Vanessa folded her arms. "Maybe. But why would you hide it if you had nothing to be ashamed of? Why come back here, of all places, if you didn't want something?" Tunde stood abruptly. "That's enough, Vanessa." The room fell silent. His voice carried authority, but his hands shook. Vanessa turned to him innocently. "I'm just sharing facts, Tunde. Or would you rather I skip the part where she was caught sneaking into your family's private quarters?" A murmur rippled through the staff. Grace's knees weakened. "That's not what happened," she cried softly. "I was sent away. But the words died in her throat. Tears filled her eyes, and the humiliation burned deep. Tunde clenched his fists. He wanted to scream the truth, to tell everyone this woman wasn't some scandalous stranger but his mother. Yet fear held him back. His father sat frozen beside him, eyes narrowing with confusion. "Do you know her?" Mr. Johnson asked under his breath. Tunde swallowed hard. I'm not sure," he lied. Grace turned to leave, her shoulders trembling. The room blurred around her, faces, laughter, pity. She stumbled toward the door, but Vanessa's voice stopped her again. "Oh, don't rush off," Vanessa said lightly. "We're not done. I just think everyone should know. Sometimes the people who clean our floors are the same ones trying to climb into our family pictures." The laughter that followed cut through Grace like glass. She dropped her mop, the clang echoing through the hall. For a moment, everything stopped. Even the air felt still. Then, without a word, she walked out. Tunde couldn't bear it anymore. He rose to his feet, his voice sharp. Enough. But she was already gone. Outside, the rain had begun again, just like the night she lost her child. She walked through it without an umbrella, tears mixing with the downpour. Inside, Tunde stood frozen, guilt washing over him in waves. Vanessa watched with satisfaction, unaware of the storm she had just unleashed. Later that night, Tunde found himself at the same bus stop where he had first seen Grace waiting one morning. The city lights flickered weakly, reflecting on the wet ground. He held the folder from the hospital tightly in his hand. He whispered to himself, "She doesn't deserve this. Not again." His phone buzzed, a message from Vanessa. "She's gone. Maybe now you'll stop treating her like she matters." He stared at the screen for a long time, then whispered, almost to the wind, "She matters more than you'll ever know." The rain fell harder. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, and Tunde knew what he had to do next. The city was still wet from the night rain. Dawn broke quietly, casting a gray light over the narrow streets of the old district. When he finally saw her door, he froze. It was slightly open. Inside, Grace sat by a small table, her Bible before her, lips moving in silent prayer. She looked so peaceful, so broken, so strong. "Ma," Tunde said softly. Grace lifted her head slowly. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her eyes were red but calm. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "People like you don't come to places like this." Tunde stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Please, don't say that." He placed the folder on the table. "I saw the records. I know the truth now." Grace's hand shook. She looked down at the papers, her breath catching when she saw her old signature. Grace Jones, mother. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said, tears forming again. "Not after everything they took from me." Tunde knelt before her. "You never should have been the one to apologize," he said quietly. "It's me. It's all of us who owe you an apology." For the first time, she looked at him not as a stranger, but as the child she had once lost. The years melted away. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and touched his face. "You look just like your father," she whispered. "But your heart, you have mine." He closed his eyes, her hand on his cheek. A tear slid down his face. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you yesterday," he said. "I froze. I didn't know how to face them, but I promise I'll never let them hurt you again." Grace smiled faintly through her tears. "You don't owe me that. Just live well. That's all a mother ever wants." Tunde shook his head. "No. The world humiliated you in front of me. They need to know who you are. They need to know the truth." Grace tried to stop him. "Please, don't make a scene. I've had enough shame for one life." But Tunde's voice was steady now. "You call it shame. I call it injustice." He stood, his expression firm, his purpose clear. "You've hidden long enough. Now it's my turn." By mid-morning, the Johnson Corporation was buzzing again. Rumors of the previous day's incident still lingered. Some pitied Grace, others mocked her. Vanessa walked through the lobby like a queen who had won a war. She was in Tunde's office when he entered, eyes red but steady. "You're early," she said lightly. "Trying to do damage control?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at her coldly. "I called a staff meeting for noon. Make sure everyone attends." Vanessa frowned. "Another meeting? What for?" He didn't reply. He simply turned to the window, the city skyline reflected in his eyes. At noon, the conference room filled again. Everyone expected a routine announcement, perhaps an apology, perhaps more gossip. Grace wasn't there. She couldn't bear to return. Vanessa took her usual seat, proud, poised. Mr. Johnson arrived last, adjusting his tie, nodding politely at his son. "What's this about, Tunde?" Tunde took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edge of the podium. "Yesterday," he began, "a woman who has served this company faithfully for years was publicly humiliated in this very room." The audience shifted uncomfortably. Some glanced at Vanessa, others at Mr. Johnson. She was mocked, Tunde continued, for being poor, for having a past, for daring to exist in a world that judged her by her uniform. And we all stood by and watched. Vanessa laughed lightly. "Oh, please, don't turn this into a sermon." She lied to everyone. Enough. Tunde's voice thundered. The room fell silent. He took a step forward, holding up the old hospital file. You all mocked her without knowing who she truly is. But I know. I found the truth. He turned to his father. You remember the woman you let them drive away years ago? The one who begged to keep her child. Mr. Johnson's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Tunde's voice broke. I'm talking about Grace Jones, the cleaner you let them shame yesterday. She's not just an employee. She's my mother. Gasps erupted around the room. Vanessa's smile froze, disbelief washing over her face. Mr. Johnson stood abruptly. What nonsense is this? Tunde opened the folder and placed the documents on the table. These are my birth records. Her name is right there. She gave birth to me. You took me from her, and she's lived her whole life in silence because of our pride. The room was dead still. Every whisper died. She worked here, Tunde said, his voice softer now. She cleaned our floors, emptied our trash, and still carried herself with grace and humility. And while we sat in comfort, she prayed for us. He looked around the room, his eyes filled with tears. If that's not the definition of greatness, then I don't know what is. Vanessa stood flustered. Tunde, you can't be serious. I'm very serious, he said coldly. And from today, Mrs. Grace Jones will no longer work here as a cleaner. She will be honored as a member of this company's founding family, because she always was. The crowd broke into murmurs. Some clapped hesitantly. Mr. Johnson sank slowly into his seat, covering his face with his hand. Vanessa's voice trembled. You can't just make decisions like this. You'll destroy your reputation. Tunde turned to her. Reputation means nothing if it's built on cruelty. She glared at him, then stormed out, heels echoing down the corridor. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Grace heard a knock on her door again. She opened it to find Tunde standing there, holding a bouquet of lilies. Behind him were company cars, and her old boss, Mr. Johnson, stepping out slowly. Grace froze. Mr. Johnson removed his hat, shame heavy on his face. Grace, he said quietly, I don't expect forgiveness, but I came to ask for it anyway. She said nothing. Tunde placed the flowers on her table. They know now, he said softly. Everyone does. And they respect you. Grace looked from father to son, her heart trembling. I never wanted revenge, she whispered. I just wanted peace. Mr. Johnson's voice cracked. You deserve far more than peace. You deserve the life we stole from you. Tears filled her eyes. All I ever needed was my child, she said. Tunde reached for her hand. You have him now, and you'll never lose him again. She smiled faintly, the years of pain melting away. For the first time in decades, Grace Jones allowed herself to cry freely, not from sorrow, but from healing. Outside, the rain had stopped. The evening light poured through the window, soft and golden, as if heaven itself had opened. The morning after the revelation felt different. The city outside buzzed as always. But for Grace, time had slowed to a whisper. She stood by her small window, sunlight spilling through the faded curtains, touching her face softly. Her hands trembled as she clutched the scarf she'd worn for years, the same scarf she'd wrapped around baby Tunde when she left him behind. Tears welled again, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from peace. The knock came gently at first. Then a voice she now knew by heart. Mom, it's me. When Tunde stepped in, he looked different, no longer the proud executive or the uncertain man torn by truth. His eyes were calm, his shoulders steady. He crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped her in his arms. Grace melted into his chest, trembling as he whispered, I'm sorry for every second I wasn't there. For every day you suffered in silence. Grace smiled faintly. You were there, my son. I saw you grow, in the newspapers, on television, in my prayers. I was there for every step, even if you never saw me. The embrace lasted long enough for years of pain to dissolve. When they finally pulled apart, Grace cupped his face, her voice gentle but firm. Now go, my son. Do what's right. Not for revenge, but for truth. By noon, the boardroom at Jones Holdings was filled. Executives whispered nervously. Cameras flashed. Vanessa sat stiffly, her eyes darting toward the door, dread crawling up her spine. She had tried to salvage her image overnight, spinning stories, pointing fingers, but nothing could erase the video that had gone viral. Her mockery of the cleaner who turned out to be the CEO's mother. Then the door opened. Tunde walked in beside Grace. The room fell silent. Every eye turned, some in shame, some in awe. The same woman they had once ignored now stood tall beside the man they called Sir. Tunde's voice was calm but carried the weight of thunder. Some of you forgot that humanity is the foundation of this company. Yesterday, you watched a woman be humiliated, a woman who gave me life, who sacrificed everything so I could stand here today. He turned slowly toward Vanessa, who shrank back in her seat. I built this company to honor integrity. But what we built means nothing if cruelty is allowed to thrive. Vanessa tried to speak, but her words crumbled into whispers. I didn't know. I didn't mean. Tunde raised a hand. You meant every word. But today is not about punishment. It's about accountability. He looked around the room. Mrs. Grace Jones will now serve as head of community outreach. Her story will guide our company's new initiative to fund women in need, cleaners, widows, mothers, anyone society overlooks. Gasps filled the room. Grace's eyes widened. Tunde, I don't deserve this, she whispered. He smiled softly. You deserve the world, Mom. Applause rippled through the room, hesitant at first, then swelling into something powerful. For the first time, Grace didn't lower her gaze. She stood tall, her heart steady, tears shimmering as she looked at her son with pride and gratitude. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, they returned to the mansion she had once been forced to leave. The gates opened slowly, the same ones that had closed behind her all those years ago. Grace hesitated, her steps faltering. Tunde reached out his hand. Come home, Mom. She took it, and together, they walked inside. The house was quiet, golden light washing over the marble floor. Every corner carried a memory, the night she'd cried in the hallway, the day she'd been thrown out. But as she looked around, it no longer felt like a place of pain. It was a place redeemed. In the grand living room, a portrait hung, newly placed that morning. It was Grace, standing in her cleaner's uniform, holding a broom, her eyes strong and full of quiet dignity. Below it, a brass plate read, The heart that built the Jones legacy. Grace touched the frame gently, her voice barely a whisper. After everything, this is enough. Tunde smiled beside her. No, Mom. This is just the beginning. They stood there, mother and son, as the evening light poured through the tall windows, wrapping them in gold. The pain, the secrets, the years of silence had all led to this moment, not of revenge, but of restoration. And somewhere deep inside her heart, Grace knew, sometimes the story of power and wealth isn't about who rises highest, but who remembers to lift others along the way. What did you get to learn from this story? Kindly drop your thoughts and questions below. Do well to hit the subscribe button to see more emotional and exciting stories like this on Folktales by Siri.